Great games at your table. This is Jonathan Albin and NycosRPG, and I am Game Master Jay. And we are today going to take a few minutes to talk about storytelling. And today's process is going to be kind of free-flowing. I'm not putting up any agenda lists. I'm not even putting up any logos or anything. I'm just going to sit and talk for a moment, and I hope you get a chance to ask any questions you might want to. I'm open to conversation about anything, and this is I guess I've been wanting to have a heart to heart with the gaming world in its entirety at some point, and this is as good a time as any. And I guess it would be to say that it's been a blast. It's exciting to sit down at a table with new players and talk about the game session and decide, what we want to do as a group, where we want to go, kind of functions we want to do. I've set up the Session Zero Chronicles because I realized there's so much information to be had about the NycosRPG that you can't sit in just one Session Zero and get a complete understanding of it. So I thought I would use that format to talk about it. And so, having done so, it's been kind of sad because the number of people that have jumped in to watch it have been minimal. And I think it's probably because every game master has the same goal of having new players at his table and new adventures to give. And I apologize for my video fading in and out. It's a very sensitive focus, I guess. I haven't figured out how to stop that nonsense. I probably need to hire a camera crew and all that kind of thing, but thus far that hasn't been my purpose or intent to make things perfect. I just wish I could get it so it would stabilize instead of moving around. Maybe it's because I've got a face. You're perfect? Yes, Strigley is here. Whenever Strigley enters the room, we know things are going to go great because he always asks the best questions and is perfect. So, welcome. Anyway, the reason for the simplicity of format today is because we had something very strange happen today, and that was that a game session came and went, and one of my dear friends, Jean, didn't make it, and she has never missed a game session, not once. Even when she had medical situations come up, she's found ways to get there in one way or the other. And so I was really worried about her, and so I didn't do a lot of the planning stuff that I normally do on Sunday afternoons. So this week is going to be a little rougher than usual because I didn't do my usual pre-planning. So I don't have the list of, I guess it's over in this corner normally, my big list of questions or comments, and I don't have any of that today. So having said that, I guess I want to be grateful and appreciative of all the games that I have gotten to run over the past 50 years. It's one thing to call people up and say, hey, you want to get together and play a game, and have 2 or 3 friends show up and have a good evening and roll lots of dice and laugh together and stuff. But it's completely different when you have players that'll dedicate themselves to week after week after week after week for months and years. Okay, Strigley's question. What techniques can I use to effectively describe environments, NPCs, and combat scenarios to enhance the overall atmosphere? Wow, it's like he read some of my previous notes. That's a great question. The easiest technique is to treat your scene as a player in the story and do the same thing that you would expect a player to do in describing himself. So give them the who, what, when, where, the just the linear description. Then give them a personality description in terms of what the feel of the place is, the uh, demeanor, the attitudes, the motive, the uh, I guess in real terms, it's what is known as the theme, and a lot of people don't necessarily know what a theme is or how to present it. But a good example of a theme would be, let's say, take the theme of horror, and if you were going to be describing a scene for a horror film, it would be considerably different from the way you would describe a scene in the theme of a children's cartoon. You're going to use different terminology. You're going to focus on different things than you might. You're going to spend as much time in determining what you're going to say before you say it as you do orchestrating which words you're going to use, because you want to convey as much as you can in as short a period as you can, because one thing that kills a game master is exposition. If you spend too much time, like I usually do, pontificating, you talk right past the point of usefulness. So, short and sweet, thematic, and matter of fact. It's probably the best way to describe it. As far as to enhance the overall atmosphere, that's where vocabulary comes in. And even diction. If you have a scene you're trying to describe, you almost have to consider how you want to portray it to get the right motive. I mean, if I'm in a playful mood and I want to have an adventure that's rollicking and silly, I'm going to use a lot different terms, a lot different language than I would if what I was trying to do is convey a very serious combat. Okay, so get out your piece of paper, and matter of fact, you can use the NycosRPG persona sheet, the thing you would use for a character, only you describe the scene in those terms. So, utilitarian wise, decide what effectiveness you want to have in the scene, how you want it to play out, but also use the spaces to cover the concepts of culture and of motive, the place and the estates, to write your notes for yourself on what you want to convey, and therefore you'll have a place to write down the specifics of what the motive is or whatever. Yeah, you can go off of the standard 5 sentences. As a matter of fact, I'd go on to the 6th one as well. The whole spidey sense or feeling of oddness or sense that you're being watched. These are all things that players expect to kind of respond to. So, yeah, you could go off of the senses. That's an easy short version. I would go a little bit broader because you want to catch. Well, a theme is more than just what you experience, right? See, feel, touch, sound is all good as a baseline, but you also need to have what is the sense of the place, what is the mood of the place, what is the, I mean, is there a sense of foreboding? Is there a sense of awe? Is there a physical a tendency from, for example, even simple things like which direction is the wind blowing? If you're in a coastal town and you're describing some, creepy scene, And then you mentioned that the wind is blowing offshore despite it being early morning. This may not sound like much, but it is for a person who's aware of the way things work in a coastal setting, will feel that sense of foreboding or that feeling of oddness, because that's not normal. If you've got early morning, you tend to have onshore flow instead of offshore flow. So even the little nuanced things like, oh, that's true. That's true. I have done videos of that before. I did one recently on establishing a scene. That's a good example. I'll go back and flag it, put a marker in this one. Right there where my finger went up. That's where I'll put the video. So there should be a link in the YouTube version that will link back to establishing a scene. But yeah, you definitely need to develop an established scene so that the player knows exactly what's going on in that. So, what strategies can I use to keep combat encounters dynamic and interesting? Avoiding repetition and monotony. Well, my first knee-jerk response is move out of Dungeons and Dragons land, because Dungeons and Dragons and other games of that ilk all intentionally do slog. But that's the first reaction. Second reaction is possibly consider a 1, 2, or 3 strike attitude about your monsters and your villains. The biggest challenge to Dungeons and Dragons as a mechanism is that the piles of hit points mean that a villain feels like he should keep going on and on and on after the fight has begun, simply because he can. But if you are playing for a theatrical or dynamic game experience, then you should consider what other motivations a villain or a monster would have to stop the fight. At what point do they decide they've had enough and quit? How soon do they run away? Now, generally speaking, if you have a monster run away, your players will give chase because that's what they've been conditioned to do. But if you're going to be using using the Dungeons & Dragons mechanism for conflict, you need to almost describe what the monster's attitude is, his feeling is in the fight, to decide whether he's going to continue to push or whether or not he's going to run away. And by having those kind of parameters, you can kind of condition your players to do the same, to think about what they could do to disconnect. Because the way the mechanism is designed for Dungeons & Dragons, you are there in essence to kill the monster. Fight until the monster dies, until the hit points go away. And so the slog is going to be a natural tendency unless you find ways to get rid of it. So one way is have the monsters quit. Have a parameter by which they decide to exit the fray and run away. A second would be to have conditional changes that occur in the fight that make it more dynamic. So, for example, the party decides to go hunting bears, and they find a bear, and they start to do damage to the bear, but the bear is a mother, and you introduce a cub to the scene, and now the mother gets the rage bonus or whatever, and gets to act at a different tier or different set of conditions. And by ratcheting the conditions each time the players meet an objective within the fight, then the fight changes. The easiest way to remember this is to write stages. Just write the word stages on your fight sheet if you're going to be playing. I've mentioned this before, but I use these small boogie board kind of notepads. Yeah, so by having one of these, I just would write something like this. stage 1, 2, 3, indicating what's going to happen at stage 1, what triggers stage 2, what triggers stage 3. It could be how many hit points the monster it's taken. It could be the number of strikes that the players have put onto it. I mean, if you think about it, if you're in a street brawl and one person hits you, that's one kind of fight. But when you've got 2 or 3 people swinging at you, that's a very different kind of fight, and therefore your strategy and your determination to continue to fight is going to change over time. And so if the issue is that when you start, like for example, a great example is a barroom brawl. A barroom brawl fight. Right, okay, so that's fight stages. But fight stages can also be separate from a scene stage. So a scene stage can trigger different responses. So, for example, they go into the bar. Let's go use an example of your party of adventurers that go into the guy's house and trash it. They've gone into the house. Stage 1 was the guy let them stay in his house and he left. So that stage gave them the grounds to do what they wanted. But if they started breaking things, what's the possibility of somebody hearing them? If you're in a relatively populated area, somebody might have heard something break when they, broke into his wine cellar or whatever. They may have made some noise. And so that changes the stage, and therefore you can say, well, now that there's been a sound made, there's a possibility that the local authorities might show up. So take that into account, and each round roll a dice to see whether or not that stage triggers or whatever. Good old ads. All right, so the second way, besides combat, we talked about fight stages. But yeah, I got you. The fight stage is over. There's also the possibility of non-fight stages, and that can be, for example, triggered by an action. So the party is in a guy's house and they break something. There's a possibility that it made a noise. There's a possibility somebody outside heard it. There might be a local authority walking by or whatever. So that can also trigger a stage change. And that stage change will alter the direction of the story if you want it to. So therefore, by doing so, by recognizing stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 of your session, you are giving yourself a place for the story to become more dynamic, more ratcheted up than normal. Final thing that could actually be that there are stage triggers. And examples of this would be if a particular particular monster only comes out after midnight. Describe the narrative setting of the place perhaps slightly differently as you get closer to that midnight hour. How maybe the fog is rolling in and there's a more ominous feel, or there's a silence that it becomes pervasive. Even the sounds of the crickets and the frogs stop for some reason. All of these little things add to enhance. They tend to enhance the session because the players get a sense of hypervigilance. Oh, yeah, exactly. Okay, so the trick there is you need to get them to focus on the mud earlier. And what I mean by that is if you're describing that they're walking across muddy terrain, make sure you describe the squishiness, the popping sound of the muck, maybe the garbled sound of a wildlife moving through the materials or whatever. And do it well in advance of the surprise moment. Thank you very much, Grogmaster Sins. Is that Grogmaster? If it is, Grogmaster. Great name. Especially if that's from Grognard, the wargaming past history of the world. So, excellent. Welcome. I'm Jonathan Albin. This is NycosRPG, and this is a period of time that I do each evening that's called Game Master Soapbox. And usually I have a long list of rants on the screen and I go over them relatively quickly and don't stay online long. But tonight I wanted to talk about a couple of things in particular. And Strigley's been kind enough to ask a few questions that's really helped me get focused on tonight's show. So if there's anything you feel you'd like to ask, feel free to do so. And in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and continue to try to answer the question. So if you want to surprise them after midnight, maybe foreshadow earlier in the game, the day or two before, that there's something happens late at night. Don't specify when, just say late at night, in the pre-morning hours or something, and then don't do anything with it. Don't even once you've announced that it might happen, forget about it. Forget about it until we get closing in on that hour. Sure, that works. It depends on the size of the town. You have to realize that if you're talking about the size of villages that you've called villages before, if there are only 3 or 4 people, there's not going to be rumors about people disappearing. There are going to be people disappearing, and it's going to be apparent because that's too small of a balancing group. You're focusing, so you want instead for them to. Maybe a better example would be somebody who is nearly grabbed, so they've got somebody to go talk to. So you could say, oh, yeah, old Mother Hubbard, she had a problem a couple of weeks ago. One of her kids came home late, and she went up to go find them, and she had an altercation. Man, she's talking a blue streak. Terrified me just hearing about it. But you'd probably want to go talk to Mother Hubbard. She probably can give you some more information. So, okay. So if there are a lot of people traveling and anybody disappears, everyone will be talking about it. It won't be a random hearing of an echo. It'll be, did you hear what happened 3 weeks ago? How you? Yeah. So right. So yeah, it's fine to have warnings about it. But just realize that in a controlled volume of people, you'd have more. You'd have direct eyewitness accounts and things like that. Of course, you would have a lot of my cousin's brother's nephew's sister saw something once. So that would be okay. And let me ask a different question. This monster that's attacking people, has it been doing it for a really long time, or is it a relatively new occurrence? Because that also will play into it. If it's always been that there's something creepy about that end of town, that's fine. But again, if you want to downplay but mention the mud issue, just make sure that they've heard you talk about somebody having problems with something coming from the mud. Then just completely drop it and talk about other things. Talk about people who disappeared. Talk about whatever. But you want to give the hint and then get it out of their mind again, because what you do when you create that short circuit of information that's hanging and dangling out there, when later you start to describe their travels in the dark, passing through mud and the squish of their feet and things like this, it will trigger that memory of the conversation you had, and then they'll start asking you questions. And the trick there is that you play the questions off. You don't directly answer them. You just say, oh, yeah, that guy did say something about there being something in the mud at some point. But right now, it just seems cold. It seems a little foggier than normal, and there seems to be maybe even a slight moan on the wind. It almost sounds like a voice, but you can't quite make it out. Okay, you continue to trudge. Okay, as you're walking through, blah blah blah. Sticks break, creak of the croaking of the frogs, and as you're walking along, and you no longer hear the frogs. As a matter of fact, it's deathly silent out here. The only thing you hear is sucking sound as your feet lift out of the mud and move forward and trudge. Remember, as we talked about before, Miles Davis said that in jazz music, it isn't the notes that you play; it's the spaces between the notes that you play, and that's really the critical part here. Is that you want to play the pauses, play the uncertainty, the curiosity, the tension, because that's how you build the experience for the players. And then once it happens, make it explosive. Make it the thing, whatever it is, rises out of the mud, causing one of them to have to make a dex save to maintain his footing, and another one is knocked off balance because the thing rose directly under him or whatever. And you create now instantaneous dynamic tension on top of the suppressed tension that was already being built by the story. And now the players are jazzed and ramped up, and I've had situations where innocent people get pushed into the mud and stuff because of the panic over what they think is going on, even though it's not at all what they think. So, that answer your question? I think that was a really good question to ask too, and from the standpoint of being the storyteller, to build that dynamic tension is to take control of the story, because as the narrator, you can overtalk it, but you can also creatively limit their information, and be sure to answer perfunctorily any questions that they ask in advance. Like if you think that you may have tipped your hand earlier, then don't have them attack the first night. Let them stew a while. Let them go ahead and creep them out. Go ahead and talk about the muck, the mire, the sound of the frogs, but there isn't any attack. Your minds are just playing tricks on you. It's fine, yeah. And then, aha, gotcha. So that's the way that you do that. And as far as the checklist, your sensory input is one. Second one is the literary, the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, why, how, and the H. But that whole list of who, what, when, where, why gives you a grounding for the story, so that the players are not without agency. They're not foundering. The more information you can give them that lets them respond, the better off you are in making it a story that the players will want to be engaged with. So I hope that answers the question there. Grogmeister, do you have anything in particular you'd like to ask, or whatever? How long have you been playing, and what games in particular? I've been game mastering for 48 years. I learned to play D&D from one of the guys that designed the game, and I have played virtually every RPG, tabletop RPG out there, and several of the online games as well. But I've far and away favored face-to-face tabletop. Yeah, you could say just don't feel safe. You can put markers. You put visual markers there. You could have warning signs. Maybe somebody posted. If people are concerned, they try to protect their friends by saying, "Abandon hope, ye all ye who enter here." Right? That's from I think that's from Dante's Inferno. You could say people don't feel safe. You could say it's a dangerous area. Don't be there after dark. Bad things have happened. Scuttlebutt says that there have been people that have vanished. All kinds of different things you could say or could take into account. How can you talk about the mud without it being obvious? Is it raining? Has it been raining? Is it a bog? the players are going to want to know what kind of terrain they're in. So, describing that, scuttlebutt, not cuttlebutt. Yeah, so yeah, snow is going to cause some moisture. If you have a lot of mud, which is what you were asking about earlier, I would assume that it was pretty darn heavy downpour or was a low-lying area or something, which is conducive to bog monsters and all of that. Um, Muddy snow. All I can think of when I hear terms like muddy snow is I think of uh, the time I lived in Colorado, and oof, I'm glad to be out of there, man. Snow and muck is awful, even when it's a safe area. You don't want to be out there scooping. But yeah, so the question about how to talk about the mud without drawing attention to the mud. Oh, okay. Cool. Cool, cool. Um, Glad to have you among us at this point. Uh, it depends on where you are. Whether as a matter of fact, if you're looking for a game, Strigley will tell you that we're working on putting together a all new games group on Discord on the Nycos channel, and we will be live streaming the games. So whether you want to be on as a player via text or whether you want to actually be a part of it, you could actually join the Discord. And Discord links down below, and I think Strig will probably put it in now that we're talking about it. There you go. Excellent. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So as a subscribed member, you can join in on the Saturday game, 9 a.m. Pacific time, California time. Will be when we start. I tend to do a session 0 before then, so I'd be on before that at like 8 a.m. Pacific time. And we're going to play for 3 to 4 hours. So we'll play between 9 a.m. and say noon, maybe 1 o'clock, depending on the players. And in doing so, we're actually playing a new RPG mechanism called NycosRPG that I devised. And there's a lot of videos on the subject. You can learn how to play. As a matter of fact, at the website, NycosRPG.com, there is a downloadable persona sheet and also a quick start guide that can teach you how to play the game, even if you don't own the book. And of course, the book is now available at NycosRPG as well as the PDF, or you can also purchase the hard copy through lulu.com. But we'll get to that later. But anyway, so if you're looking for a games group, that's the first one you can join. I also have a Patreon account, and if you join the Patreon account at $20 value, then you get a Patreon only game that we play on Sundays. That's in the second option. And of course, then I also do live games at a game store in Southern California. So if you're in the LA area, we're in Redlands, California, which is a suburb. But we run games on Monday nights and Tuesday nights every week, 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. on Mondays and Tuesdays. So those are all the ways that you could be playing right now. We also have a separate game in a sci-fi environment, but that one has a bit of a vetting process. So if you wanted to play, we can coordinate with the people who are the primaries in that, and if they accept you, you can join with that game as well. So going back to the question about muddy snow. So describe the weather. Describe to them the stickiness of the snowfall and how it is a wet snow, and that the ground has absorbed much of this over the last few days. Maybe it's not accumulating much on the ground, but it's definitely wet enough to be noticeable. Also, think about it. We're talking about a fantasy setting where people are wearing various kinds of boots. You could ask the players what kind of boots they are wearing, because that will give you an idea of how annoying and cloying and dangerous walking around in that cold, wet mud will be. If they are wearing traditional high top soft boots, the leather will soak in minutes and their feet will be instantaneously freezing as it steps down into the mud. Unless the ground is slightly warmer, in which case they'll just be damp and very uncomfortable, feeling the liquid squish between their toes. And that will give you a way to describe what's going on with the mud without drawing attention to what might be beneath the mud and then making them look at that in a hypervigilant way. Have NPCs putting new layers of snow onto the mud. Okay, so Weather 101. If you put more snow on a muddy place, it's just going to get more muddy because the average temperature of the mud. Yeah, that's just asking for trouble. As a former landholder in a wet, cold, clammy environment, adding snow would not reduce, unless you're going to actually refreeze it. You know, if your intent is to actually try to freeze the ground, but that's creating permafrost, and that's not going to happen just by shoveling extra snow onto it. The reality is that water conveys heat pretty quickly, and so unless it's ice, anyway, if it's ice, it can be okay. Maybe, but how much are you saying they're doing it as a job? How many people are you having do this? Because now if you do that, that's going to definitely draw attention to the players, to the fact that they're trying to make it less muddy. How many people? How much ground are we covering? Why in this particular place? Is it a bridge that broke, maybe? Is there a reason why the area is so boggy and muddy? What can you do to make it less watery? Well, okay, first of all, if they have a lumber mill close by, have them shoveling sawdust into the mud, because then it'll make it into a brick. I mean, that's exactly how they developed the concept of making brick, was literally pouring sawdust into the trenches of a road that was breaking down, and the sawdust added fiber, if you will, to the watery mess, and eventually effuses the liquid over a larger area. So that would be if you wanted to make it less soupy. But the question again is, which are you wanting from the players? Are you wanting them to experience the mud as okay? But my point is, you can use whatever. You can just determine how muddy you want it to be. You don't have to go through all the hoops of explaining how they're fixing it, unless there's a reason why they're fixing it. If they're worried about the bog monster, then maybe they're actually doing it to cancel the bog monster. Maybe they were told to do so. If so, they're going to leak that information to the players. So how much do you want the players to have access to? Yes, cold will do it. If you've not lived in the areas of permafrost or long winter seasons, the ground can actually become cold enough that it holds the water in an icy material and separate. Right. No, I get that. So you can. What I'm getting at is you're the narrator, so you explain to them what you want to explain to them. If you want them to be aware of the muddiness, then just describe it. What it feels like, what it looks like, what its experience would be. And in doing so, you are able to um, give them a sense of the tension that you want to give them. And I guess the biggest thing is to just remember that when in doubt, shut up, because whatever you've told them probably is more than you wanted to anyway. So, uh, if you're wanting them to be afraid of the mud, then mention the mud. If you don't want them to be afraid of the mud and you want them to be completely surprised by it, then you do need to explain the climate so that they will understand that it is muddy. But you don't necessarily have to focus that on it so much that it causes the players to, get wise to the scene. Okay. Is the monster going into town and attacking people in town, or are they only attacking them on the fringe? Yeah, any of those will work. So, yeah, you got to explain it to them. So if you've got to explain it to them, just make it a one-off comment. Yeah, it's kind of muddy here, you know. But then, like I said, as the time approaches for the really bad thing to happen, then you drop subtle hints. The frogs, it's cold enough and snowy enough for any frogs anyway. But if you had some night bird activity or whatever, all of a sudden it stops. Okay, so if it's not happening near the shops, if it's happening out on the edge of town, then just got to explain why the players are there. Got to give them a reason to go there. So once you've established it, then you're good to go as far as that's concerned. And that goes back to establishing the scene, the who, what, when, where, and the sensory input, what you see, what you hear, what you taste. These all set up the scene, and just realize that anything you leave out is going to be the parts that the players are going to remember, because they're going to go, wait, there was the sound of frogs earlier, and do we hear the frogs anymore? No. In fact, the night owl, the hoot owl that you heard earlier, also is silent. There's kind of a creaking sound in the bog, maybe some wood separating or being dragged under the marsh by gravity or whatever. So you just want to create an artificial level of tension until the players take it over and make it into actual tension. And then when you do snap the action into place, have it be rapid. Monster comes out of the goop, makes its assault on whoever is going to assault, makes its attempt to drag them under or whatever, and then let the chips fall where they may, so to speak. I hope that explained fairly well. It would be helpful for you. So, Rogmaster, how did you come upon roleplay games? Was it something you'd always been interested in, or is it something that you just picked up recently? Oh, and welcome to whoever our third guest is. Feel free to comment and join the conversation with us. We're talking about role-playing in particular, and as a veteran game master with more than 45 years, I am in a kind of an ask me anything kind of a mood. So feel free to ask me any questions about the games that you're currently in, or some question that's been burning in your brain that you maybe haven't been able to find an answer to, and I'll be glad to answer them. The out of the abyss is a pretty good adventure if you found people to run that with. That one's got lots of bodies. Oh, cool. So, do you prefer playing face? Oh, hello from Scotland. Iraq Banre. Am I saying Iraq Banre? Am I pronouncing that right? Iraq Banre. Beonre. probably putting too many syllables in there. I have a friend of mine who lives in Wales, and I know Wales isn't Scotland. I'm not making that comparison at all. But the town he lives in has like 12 vowels and 2 consonants. Okay, so yeah, that's pretty common. Grogmaster. The Dungeons and Dragons mechanism, because it's so long in the tooth. Many of the rules were devised long ago, and players have continued to use them even though they don't understand. Oh, excellent. Yeah, the role-playing games are the bomb. I've played basically every role-play game out there. For a while, I was the marketing director for the Game Manufacturers Association, and so I was working with the publishers of every card game, board game, miniatures game, role-play game, anything that was not a computer game. And I was learning how to play and run games from every genre. During that period, I was averaging about 7 new games a week. And so, as a storyteller, I've covered every form of fiction and fantasy. And now I've got my own game, and I'm out for new players. I've become my own enemy, so to speak. No, NycosRPG is the system I devised as a direct result of the problems and the challenges that I've seen in roleplay games that are out there, and fixes what I consider to be the biggest bugaboos in the systemic world of roleplay games. One of which is there's been a reduction of players who operate within the theater of the mind, and so I advocate for and promote a cinematic form of play that operates within the imagination of the players far more than it does on a tabletop or a map. Now, I do use maps extensively for coordination with the players so they get an idea of where we are, what's going on, but the actual dynamic of play is more narrative. So, and in particular, right now, I'm running games in high fantasy setting using the NycosRPG Dark Shards rules and a single standalone science fiction space opera style game in the Distant Suns structure of NycosRPG. So, let's see here. Grogmaster says, I love the games, though I've seen people who said they would never play being asked to continue and say how enjoyable. Oh, that they thought they would never play, asking to continue and enjoying it. It really is on how willing to involve yourself in the story and just paint the imagination. Yes, exactly. So the trick is that it's actually, in my estimation, one of the biggest challenges is that the very realm of imaginary play has been downgraded because so many people have gotten into playing video games and operating with tropes and descriptors that are imitative rather than creative, because it's just maybe laziness, but it's more to the point, it's easier than actually having to do the work of operating within the imagination. And so by creating a tool that makes it easier to play at the theater of the mind, you're actually creating a wider creativity matrix and a better play experience. Sure, go ahead. Feel free to ask any questions you want. I'm on every night at 11 o'clock, generally speaking, and usually I have a targeted message that's about half an hour, 40 minutes long. And so I usually blast through that and then stay on if there's anybody who is on with me. So if you ever see me online, hop on and just say hi, because I'll as I told Strigley the other day, I don't talk too much. You all just listen too well. So You get me going. I'm like an Energizer bunny. The longest game event that I ever ran was 17 hours straight as a game master, and that was with 107 players, all in the same game at the same time, which is a different kind of an animal, I can tell you. So, yes. So feel free to ask away. You have several ideas, but would like to get other perspective on how to run a scenario. Okay, so how to run a scenario for a new campaign beginning. So the question is, when you say campaign, what do you mean? And most people who say campaign don't even necessarily know what that phrase means, and they just heard it used, and so they throw it out there. I have a particular use of terminology that's maybe a little bit more precise, but it breaks the game sessions down into individual sessions, a series of sessions, and a saga. And a saga is what people usually speak of when they say campaign. It's a long tail story that's going to take multiple episodes to resolve, with multiple styles of play that will be a part of the process. So that's when I say campaign, that's what I mean. If you're speaking of how do you create a new place to launch into a campaign, then that's what is often known as a session 0, which is a single encounter, generally speaking, where you spend more time laying out for the players what the environment is going to be like and answering any questions and resolving what conflicts they might have with it. So if you can give me more specifics on what you would like to know, Iraq, I'm going to be glad to answer that for you. And I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Iraq Banre, right? Banre. B-A-E-N-R-E. Banre. Banre. Bernre. I have a character in one of my games whose name is Bairn, and he spells it B-A-E-R-N. So I don't, and he plays with the Scottish accent, although he's from Scotland. He's here in the States, but his character has a Scottish accent, and so I hope I'm pronouncing Banre properly. So ask away, sir. Okay, great. I'm concerned about running a session in a city with the city feeling big and alive. I have a hard time. Oh, we get to talk about nudes again. Yay! For those of you that don't know what I'm talking about, nudes is my term for non-essential window dressing NPCs. These are the folks that give your story its ambiance and flavor without you having to do a ton of work. Nudes, the way I'm using the term, non-essential window dressing, are basically ways to populate an area or a zone. Excellent. Glad that you got the books. Glad to hear it. The nudes, non-essential window dressing, requires a description. It doesn't have to have their names. It has to have where they are and where they're going. Just passage through. Okay. Like to have the village would be under burning and looting, and a new setting would be a homebrew. Every setting, okay. Newsflash for you. Every setting is homebrew. Why? Because that's the way the game is designed. Yes, they give you a lot of lore to build off of, but unless you're actually running a module, rules as written, you're homebrewing. That's just realize that every game master is going to run the game differently, and that's awesome. You're already a homebrewer. Congratulations. So. Okay, so you take him to a completely new world from burning a village. Okay, that's important to know. That like to kick it off with a village raid for first level characters. Okay, so that's cool. Do you want the players to know each other from the get go, or are you going to force them to get to know each other by battle brothers, the idea that they're in the fight of their lives to start off with, or are you planning on them being a group and they come into the place where the town is burning and provide voluntary support? Okay. Okay. Cool. Cool. So, you have to have an idea of what you want. So you've already pretty much clarified you want it to be a village, a burning village, and the players are going to be leaving. Is it the idea that they're in a coastal area and everybody's leaving by boats? Is that what your plan is? Are the people in the town running for their lives because the raiders are only interested in taking the town, or are the raiders actually taking prisoners? What do you see as the full picture? Because if I understand where your whole picture is coming from, I can help you sculpt it to get to what you're trying to get to. Because just saying I want to start with a fight and it's a burning place doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get the player response you're looking for. So give me a little more information about that. Okie dokie, okie dokie. So in the use of the NycosRPG, this is built in. Players are described to them. You describe to the players that they are enjoined, which means the player has made an agreement, an injunction with the NPCs of the world, so that when they become the player in the game, they actually take over the persona of the being. When you create the numbers, therefore, you're not rolling up and creating the character. Instead, you're aligning yourself with a being that already exists in the world, and then you acclimate into that being's form, and that's called the injunction. Therefore, the players can automatically detect other enjoined simply because it's a characteristic of their being that they can sense it in others. So if you're looking for inviting the players into a setting and you don't want to give them a huge expository beginning, this village raid sounds like a great idea. The fact that they know that they are enjoined would simply be a way for them to actually look across the room and notice each other and go, oh, you're like me. I should probably hang out with you until we figure out what's going on. That way you're able to then use the fight to describe the conflict between the two groups. If you use, for example, the Norman Saxon concept, that the Normans invade the Saxon territories because the two don't like each other, and the conflict causes the burning down of villages and the ransacking and pillaging and all that terror, and therefore you're able to describe both sides to the adventuring group, who may or may not be part of that story, and that's up to you if you want to consider doing it that way. If you give them this injunction, if you use the NycosRPG mechanic here, what you're doing is you're taking away one of the biggest problems in role-play games, and that is, how do players know whom they can trust? If you make it so that the enjoined know enjoined when they see them, they just automatically recognize something different about them, then you're giving them an avenue for collaboration early, instead of having to make it or force it to happen. I can't tell you how many times I've had games groups where a player says, well, I'm playing a dwarf and I hate elves, or I'm playing an elf and I hate dwarves, and then naturally there's somebody of the other species in the party, and so now they can't get along, and then I have to spend 2 or 3 or 4 weeks letting them become friends before we can actually get on to the story. And that's difficult, therefore, for the players to get to know one another. Whereas if you say, hey, you're alike, you don't look alike, you're not the same species, and yet you know there's something different about you and that you're special, then you're automatically elevating them and giving them this idea of the chosen ones without the label. Because the problem with the chosen one label is that means that the NPCs supposedly can see this differentiation. And maybe that's the case, maybe not. But if you if you lean into that curve, you end up causing problems for your players because they start to think of themselves as better or superior to your environment. And again, if you do include this concept of NPCs, you also need to embrace the idea that NPCs are living beings in your world, and they are part of your community, and therefore they are living, breathing beings, not just window dressing all the time. I mentioned nudes. I mentioned the non-essential window dressing because if you're going for a larger community, there are in a larger community there are a ton more people that you're never going to meet than there are people you will meet. And so to demonstrate that and to show it off, have a lot of window dressing in that area. This is in reference to Strigley's comment about being in a big city. If you're talking about a large population, having a map of a city is okay, but don't get burdened with what's where, because that's going to actually make it more difficult. Right. As a matter of fact, that is a very, very time-worn and overbeaten. That is the proverbial don't need to beat a dead horse. The idea of bringing a group of players together and forcing them to learn to like each other in a session is A, unrealistic, and B, counterproductive. So what I prefer to do is have the players, if they're starting as new, for example, my Tuesday group, everybody at the table, with the exception of one player, were brand new. And I have 8 players in that group now on a weekly basis. And they've only been playing together for 3 weeks. And so it was easy to say, y'all knew each other. You're all from the same little town. And you saw something very amazing and you needed to go and check it out. And now you're embroiled in it. And then by the 3rd week, they're actually veterans and talking the new players into what's going on in the story. So it's really fun. And that session is set up to always be new players. So every week or 2 we'll have 3 or 4 new players. So I imagine the group will hit my max of like 17 to 20 within a week or 2. So, cool. Yep, that's pretty interesting. Yeah. Low magic, witch burnings. That's cool. See, NycosRPG has the potential for high magic, but I've determined that magic and healing are not necessarily coincident. So you can do magic to get back. You can like seal a wound, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's not infected. That kind of thing. And so there's more drama involved with health and illness or whatever. So yeah, no, I'm with you. It's far more. Well, I mean, okay. So meeting at a bar, if everybody knows everybody, is not such a big deal. Meeting in a bar and having to go through the forced role play of getting to know who the other players at the table are, that's a burden, and it's a trope, and it's overused. So, that is a place where I don't see used enough. The simplicity of something is, hey, we grew up around another. Yeah. As a matter of fact, what I did with this group, the Tuesday group, is that there is a recruitment camp, and so the families came together to bring their young men to try out for the military or to join one of the special units and blah blah blah. And so they all got an opportunity to strut their stuff and talk trash and all of that. And so by giving them that opportunity, they then got to shine a little bit, player versus player, and they all got to describe themselves. The other thing that the NycosRPG mechanism that I'm using on Tuesdays does is it includes the ideas of both culture and motive. in character creation. So when you build a character, you not only know what their background is, which is kind of like the backstory, but it gives them a foothold in their skill space. But it also gives them an opportunity to pursue what their motive is. Are they there for money? Are they there for glory? Are they there for the girls? Or the guys? And maybe that's what attracts them. The point is that by taking away the disinterest and replacing it with interest, with things that make them want to know what's going on, you give them a justification for wanting to learn more about your campaign. So, for example, when you're talking about the burning of the village, if you're going to use that as the impetus, then I would recommend that they know each other and that they were trying to find each other during the fire. And that way they are striving to become a unit even before your very first actual conflict. And therefore you can use skills checks to bolster their egos and give them an idea of what's going on. And it gives them also a sense of belonging. And I think in a lot of ways, that's one of the really major things that a role-playing games group does. It gives a sense of ownership and membership that we don't find in most other games environments. If you're playing a board games group, yeah, you might play a board game together or whatever, but almost always those are competitive, and therefore you're playing against each other, which is counterproductive compared to a collective group towards a single objective. Magic items seem to distract them on power and possessions rather than roleplay. Yeah, okay, so here's one thing that most people don't think about, and it's something that I've added to the NycosRPG, and that is that a character's items don't start off magical, but the longer they keep them and the longer they take care of them and repair them and maintain them and improve them over time, they can actually be conveyed magic. Because in the world of Nykos, magic is everywhere, and the more that you focus on the environment and focus on, for example, keeping your sword sharp, the idea that at the end of the fight scene, each time your weapon has struck armor, there's a chance you've damaged it, so you have to roll to see whether or not the weapon was damaged. If it was, you have to repair it. If it wasn't damaged, you still need to sharpen it, re-hone the blade, and therefore by giving players a reason to interact with these items, magic or no, they're going to convey that energy into the play of that character. If your archer has to constantly be making new arrows because he's losing them in the fight scenes, he's going to be paying more attention to them, and his ability to create those magical those arrows is going to increase. He's going to get faster. He's going to make them better. He's going to be able to maybe improve them. Maybe at some point he'll be able to emboss magic onto them or whatever. There's all these different ways within Nykos mechanic that allows you to amplify the experience through what the players learn how to do. Yes. Now that's important. That's important to note. There are reasons to convey magic to items, but it isn't necessarily that the item is magical. I mean, it isn't what the magic is, but that the item is magical that matters. A person who has a magical sword that glows when villains are nearby, I mean, like Sting, that's infinitely more useful than a +1 modifier on the attack. Oh, thanks. Yeah. So in-game play is what causes advancement in NycosRPG. One of the things that I always had a problem with as a storyteller was I hated, just despised that I was the one that had to give out experience points to players. They should be able to determine when they've they know how many kobolds they've attacked. They know how many blows they've landed with that sword. They should be able to determine when that weapon has improved. And so what we determine in the NycosRPG mechanism is that every time you use an item in play, that the game master requires a dice roll for, the skill behind that die roll advances. Succeed or fail. And that's because we learn as much from failure as we do from success. And so if you have incremental improvement over time at everything that you do, eventually you'll get better and you'll want to learn more and you'll look for new things to explore to build new skills. So it becomes an ongoing reciprocal process that I, as a storyteller, no longer have to really pursue, other than verifying that, yes, indeed, they did have to use that in-game, and therefore, yes, they did get the modifier. So, let's see. Right, and so when you're going to grant magic to the players, grant an item, it really comes down to worthiness. Did they do something to justify that kind of a payout? If you're GMing and you don't have a clearly linear pathway that you expect the players to go on and then go any direction that they want, then you want them to determine that course. And so by having them look through their skills list and say, oh, hey, I happen to have a skill here in conversational discourse. I want to see whether or not I can convince this guy of thus and such. Sure, go ahead and make the die roll. Now that skill improves by 1 point. If you're allowed to do that, 1 point or 1 point advancement per skill per session, and a character, say, has 25 or 30 skills, every dice roll is going to take up 2 or 3 minutes. Just think of the amount of hours of play that you've now gone through in order to get those advancements. And yeah, somebody may, want to min-max and say, well, I'm going to swing with my sword, and then I'm going to swing with my sword, and then I'm going to swing with my sword. You still will get to improve at 1 point per session. So therefore, he's not doing anything for himself. But if he is trying to expand a group of skills across a wide array, now he's creating a realistic whole person in the game, which means that his role play will be better because he'll see and perceive of himself as being in that community, and it will no longer be my character does thus and such. It'll be I'm doing such and such because I am in that role. Hope that makes sense. Anybody got any more questions? I love answering questions, and I feel like I kind of answered the ones that were up here already. Got 3 stories working at the same time. So going back to the muddy field, if you have set it up properly, the players are going to be surprised when the monster comes out of the mud. They'll be scared, terrified, fight like mad to get out of there or whatever. Make sure you give them an opportunity to escape, so they can choose to not fight, because the mystery of what that monster was is more powerful if they don't kill it and they don't take it out. Okay, so great question. In 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, there are only 20 skills, I think is what it is. Just one list, and there are no others. All jobs that need to be described, such as you mentioned blacksmithing, are done by non-player characters who take that as an expertise. And therefore they don't ever advance. So the expertise of blacksmith is a non-player character thing that can't be formally learned within the game mechanism. Although they sort of make up for that by creating the artificer, who therefore can build machines and such, and so gets rid of it. Now, okay, so what I did instead is I created the NycosRPG that has literally hundreds of skills and is literally unlimited, because the player can actually choose to create skills that are not on the list at all. They can just say, well, I want to have a skill in knocking somebody off of a horse from the ground. I want to just be able to grab the reins in the guy's shoulder and bring him down. And I want that as a skill. Okay, so you can do that as a skill. You can choose to do that, and then learning the skill becomes a matter of either absolutely doing it from scratch and working your way up little by little, or finding a book on the subject called a treatise or a tract and learning that way, or by hiring somebody who already has the skill to teach you, in which case that's training. And so any of those three could be used to add a new skill to the player. So now, oh, that's a good one. That's a good idea, Grogmaster. The idea that you're actually using wooden planks to cover the very deepest muddy spots. That's that's actually historically accurate too. I'm from the American Midwest. I was born in Kansas, and that is a very common occurrence when the street the roads are dirt, and when they get bogged down so bad that a wagon might get stuck in the ruts or whatever, they would actually take 2x12s and drop them into those areas, and then roll the wagons across, or roll the cars or whatever across the wooden planks to keep them from getting stuck in the mud. Yeah, there you go. Right. So now if you're uh, talking about trying to convert a character in 5e, or try to make them a more realistic person, you could give them an NPC um, vocation, but that's completely out of the rules. That's not a rule book decision. That's what they call homebrew. So yeah, you could. Matter of fact, in if you go back, there's a really good chart in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Uh, it's trying to get the book out without breaking everything. Talk about some old materials here. AD&D. There is a chart fairly early in the book that lists occupations. Where is it? I'm almost there. Used to have this book memorized. Used to be able to tell you page 108 is the combat chart, and okay, so many times a character may attempt to hire people to do jobs, and the list of potential jobs. Yeah, this is a good book, by the way. This this book changed my life. Actually, before these books came out, I created my own combat charts um, that were based on 3d6 because I didn't have the polyhedral dice. I learned to play from David Arneson, which is one of the guys that designed the game. He was my buddy's grandpa Dave, and so I learned how to play. But that session was the only time that I had any polyhedral dice. For the next 3 years, I was using standard 6 dice. Yeah, and if you can find this, especially, oh, I do need to tell you the story about this one in particular. Uh, this player's handbook, I got when I was 13. I bought it for myself, and I put a paper cover on it, like we used to do. Take a paper bag and wrap it all over the outside, and kept it in pretty much pristine condition for years. And then I was in the military, and we moved, and one of my boxes vanished. I think one of my players grabbed it, so this book vanished along with all my stuff, and 15 years later, 15 years later at an auction, I bought a box, and in it was that book and two others. It had gone full circle. Who knows how many places it had been before, but I got it back, and it's still in pretty much pristine condition, so I'm glad to have it on there. And Advanced Dungeons and Dragons was probably the most coherent D&D game, even more so than 5th edition. But it had a lot of burdens, a lot of challenges to it, because... Oh, sure. Sure. I get you. But anyway, the point is that there is a list in there of hireling occupations. And that includes taxidermy and blacksmithing and carpentry and all that. And that list became, later on into the 2nd edition, they broke it down so that you had occupations separate from skills. So you could learn a skill and take an occupation that was separate. So you could have an occupation as a wheelwright, but your skills might have been in taxidermy or whatever. And they didn't make any sense, and it got weirder and weirder to the point where they scrapped all of that in favor of using game breaking or game making modifiers called feats. And that was kind of where I started my departure away from Dungeons and Dragons per se, because the mechanism for the feats was actually created by Wizards of the Coast after their purchase of Dungeons and Dragons, specifically to drive book sales to players over game masters, and fundamentally started intentionally killing off the game master pool by doing so. So yeah, I'm going to get off that subject right now. We'll go on to other things. And by the way, welcome to the new viewers. Got some additional people on that we haven't seen before. Feel free to drop in a chat or conversation. I'm carrying on 3 or 4 conversations at a time, answering questions from players, and also pontificating about the old ways, so to speak, as well as talking up the NycosRPG, which is the system I devised. Alrighty, so got the planks. We covered that part of it. We had the fire. So now we got the group of players that are gathering together to deal with the fire. Are you intending for them to avoid the fire? Do you want them to fight the fire? Do you want them to be captured by the people who lit the fire? What is your take on that? What is it we're trying to do? So I want to get a feel for what that is going on. What is going on, to see where you wanted to push it, because I could get the intention that you want them to go someplace like a third option. But I hadn't heard from you what that would be, so please feel free to fill in that gap. So, in answer to your earlier question about 5th edition and skills, originally the 20 base skills that they had were only the ones that influenced gameplay, and so they were trying to ignore and put out of the mind of the players anything beyond that, because all they wanted was people to improve their play mechanism through the skills. So these skills gave you a way to gather information, or to be stealthy about a situation, or be better equipped for combat or whatever. So the idea of skills beyond that were fundamentally non sequitur. They were not even considered. And so the mechanism of Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition was to turn to hirelings and experts that weren't players. And so they started to devise ways of giving NPCs levels, basically, without giving them levels. In other words, you could have a person in a town who was an unskilled worker, and therefore he would fight as a 0-level fighter, but he could maybe be a carpenter, and so therefore he could build boats, or he could, lay planks, like in the mud, like we're talking about in this example. that, he could do those kind of unskilled laborer things, but he was not a real person. And this problem became exacerbated when you moved into the online community, because computer game NPCs literally had no purpose other than as data resources. And if they weren't data resources, then all they got to say were the stupid little quotes like you see in Free Guy. That idea of you have just memorized that the cats get loose all the time, so we got to remember to talk about the cats. That's all they ever can do, because they are not people. And that led to a treatment of the non-essential window dressing and the non-player characters that the players would involve themselves with that was detrimental and damaging to the environment of theatrical roleplay, because you're not seeing the people in the scene as anything other than a blurry image that it has a question mark over its head or whatever. That's all you're seeing. So what you have to do instead, if you're talking about how to represent a large audience or a large crowd, use words that capture that concept. Gotcha. Okay, that's cool. So maybe they did come together to be in this place for a specific reason. Maybe even, especially if you're looking at it from the idea of the injunction, is that they were intended to be pushed through this gap, but they're aware of it. Maybe they are going there, marching to their resigned fate, thinking they're saving the world. That's a possibility. Maybe, on the other hand, they aren't, and they get forced into the place where there's a portal and have no choice. Or maybe they fall into it. Portals don't necessarily have to be vertical. They could be horizontal. So you might have just literally a hole in the ground that they fall through. But the point is that to build the dynamic tension, you need to make sure that you make the fire and the town burning as real as possible without telegraphing the destination. Maybe they know they're the chosen ones. Maybe they don't know why. Maybe they do. You have to kind of determine how much you want them to be aware of. I think from a dynamic standpoint, it'd be kind of cool for them to not even know why the town is burning, but the real reason why the town is burning is that the villainous bad guys know what's about to happen and are trying to prevent it. So the fire is actually meant to try to thwart them, keep them from making it to the portal. Yeah, maybe literally it's that fire lit it up. Most people aren't aware of this, but pine cones, many of the pine trees in the forests are they're growing in such a fashion that their seed pods are hermetically sealed. And as long as there is no bad weather and no horrible fire, those seed pods will never germinate because they are so perfectly sealed. But if they are overheated, if the area becomes perfectly hot and the little seed pod gets roasted, then it pops open and the seeds now are available for the plant to grow. So in such a fashion, maybe this gate's been sealed for however long, nobody's even known it was there, and it took the fire to activate it. Maybe a building burned down that was around it, or an ember falls from the fire into it, or whatever. You could use whatever cinematic concept you wanted. Maybe it's just an arch in the old church building that used to just go out onto a porch and there was nothing out beyond it, but now they can see beyond it into it and see that there's a safe place, so they escape into it. So the idea is that the gate was supposed to be there. It was always supposed to be there. Maybe in the long term, they're supposed to come back. maybe this entire process is that they have to go there to get something to come back to stop the people that lit the fire. They just don't know it at the beginning. Might be the entire purpose of the campaign is to go get something or somebody or become something or achieve some goal so they can come back to be the destined heroes or whatever. Players love that crap, by the way. Always play into the tropes. Whatever is going to give them the best story on the long term. The whole, we're burning down the town around you and you got to be resourceful enough to get out of the fire and have them discover the gate. That's awesome. And then it's really no other choice but you're going to be going through the gateway and you're going to save your friends because you're not going to tell them, but you're the one who knows that it's going to lead them someplace else. That kind of burden and baggage really helps to make the players feel like they're part of the story. So, and these are the story elements that get me paid the big bucks, so to speak. I'm kidding. But so let's see. That handles that part. Now we got the muddy parts taken care of. If you're looking for a book to put on your shopping list, put the NycosRPG big book. Let me show you. I got a copy of it here someplace. Oh, where did I put it? Hang on just a second. Yikes. Gotta grab something real quick. Sorry for making everybody seasick. Yep. So this is your purchase for Christmas right here, the Dark Shards Enhanced Edition. This is available from Lulu.com. NycosRPG. You can find that book. It's over 200 pages, includes a full index and table of contents that guide you through the Nykos play mechanism. And we are looking for players for the game on Saturday. So if you're able to play Saturday mornings, 9 a.m., we're looking for 3 to 4 players to play the NycosRPG system via Twitch with the idea of recording the episodes. We have a Discord, so you can become a member of the Discord, and therefore you can actually converse with us while we're playing. And all of that. And matter of fact, Strigley's already a member and is aware of the channel, and I am generally always on the Discord while I'm live streaming because I love to talk with people and stuff. So, okay, what do I have about story creation when it comes to a baseline? Okay, baseline story creation. First of all, what is a story? What is it that you want to portray? Some people, when they hear the phrase story creation, they think it has to start with once upon a time, or it was a dark and stormy night, or something like that, and has to be an absolute cliche. But it doesn't. It has to. It starts where you, as the storyteller, it depends on what you are wanting to say. So what tips do I have for storyline creation? First thing is to have a story. And a story only has to be, all the story has to be is a statement of the player's purpose. Okay, well that's perfectly fine. One of the benefits of the concept of the injunction is that if you are not there for a session, your persona still is. And so you don't lose out on any of the story elements. All it is you don't gain any experience. You don't gain any skill advancement when you're not there. But therefore, if you miss a session, you're fundamentally, your persona is still there to take care of the horses or keep the room at the hotel or whatever. So there's a way for you to be able to do that. So, yep. So there are as many ways to tell a story as there are storytellers. So you can do player versus environment, survival. You can do player versus culture. So they don't like what's going on and they're going to fix it. You can do player sheer advancement. The very idea of the hero's journey, or it could be Pilgrim's Progress. It could be a progression of evidence from point A to point B to cause the players to change their minds. So the idea is that you're building out what you're wanting to tell, and you have to basically come down to some sort of elevator pitch. So, for example, for the case of the Saturday game, the world of Nykos, I've been running the adventures in this world for 48 real-time years. That comes out to 8 complete times through in a 6-year story. So each time we play through, it takes 6 years to get through the story, and we've now done that 8 times. So this is the 9th iteration, but this is the first iteration where there have been stars in the sky. And so that means for the first time in 12,000 years of storytelling years, first time in 12,000 years, we have the ability to navigate by stellar mapping. And therefore, for the first time, people will traverse something known as the Black Water, also known as the Outer Sea. As a matter of fact, I probably should just show you guys the map so you know what we're talking about. It's not the one. Let me add a layer. Image or media. So I'll show you. This is what the world map of Nykos looks like. And so if you notice, the outer continental area is surrounded by water, and therefore in no direction has anybody ever sailed further than line of sight and returned to talk about it. So if you sail out into this black water, the outer areas, you are setting yourself up for danger. And so the Saturday group will be the first adventuring group to board a ship headed into the black water using stellar navigation. The captain of the ship has put together maps enough to build that out. So that's where they're going to go into. So, yes. So, IROC frontiersman style adventure, player versus environment is a great way to go. You have to be careful. Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition has some deal breaker spells that will ruin your fun in a survival game. One of which is called Goodberry. Because of that one spell, one player can keep the rest of the party alive every day forever. They literally cannot die from lack of food. The clerical spells that create enough water that the players will never die of thirst. Okay, so you're trying to build from the end of a campaign? Yeah. See, what I what I did, and this is talk about the genius at the time. As an 11-year-old, I wanted to create a story that would explain how the world came to be and what would kill the world. So it was be a one complete arc. And the idea was that when it got to the completion of the arc, the story would be over and I could start a new one. But the trick is that by the time I'd finished that first story arc, there were a lot of questions and a lot of mysteries that the players wanted to solve that they didn't have time because I changed stories so often because I was, continuing to build this longer tailed story. So I relaunched, and I literally relaunched from the beginning point of the original campaign arc with all of the intended Easter egg materials that other players had created on the pathway. So therefore, players in the second iteration interacted with places and items and things that had only come up because of the play through the first time around. Well, now we're talking 8 iterations later. There's a whole planet full of Easter eggs to be discovered, literally in any direction you travel. That map that I just showed is the newest iteration of a map that was originally drawn in 1978. So the map has improved, it has changed and altered over time, but that map is fundamentally the same one that was created clear back when I was 15 years old. So when you're building a new setting, the trick is to know where the story's going, but not to know the end, because the players really have to be the agents. If you want a very successful role-playing game, you have to leave that in the hands of the players to find you the solution and trust them enough, give them enough rope, so to speak, so they can put themselves at risk, finding new answers, and thereby now interpreting what's going to happen in the future. So if you want to build a story out, by all means, write a prophecy. One of the best things you can do is create an open-ended prophecy. If you haven't read anything about Nostradamus, go and read a book or two on Nostradamus. Read on the Oracle at Delphi. Read up on great prophecies of the past. You can even see it in biblical works if you really wanted to get down to it and look at the concept of the end of time and rapture and all of that kind of stuff that people have created over time to explain the endings of the Bible. These are all fun things to look at in terms of how their minds work, because we create the truth out of the fiction, because we imagine what's going to happen and then we play through it. So when you are looking for a process, create for yourself an open-ended prophecy, something along the lines of, in the last days there will arise a core set of adventurers who will do A, B, and C, not in any particular order, and who will achieve some great thing and be at a certain point. And that's all you need. That is broad enough, thin enough. Right. Exactly. Very Battlestar Galactica. Matter of fact, Battlestar Galactica, if you know the truth, BSG was actually written by somebody trying to explain his own interpretation of the Book of Mormon, because he was a Mormon and was wanting to show their adventures in this fiction environment. So yes, the mysteries, the myths become history, and the mysteries become religion. That's the way I like to say it. And the trick too is that this goes to the magic items we were talking about earlier. The sword of Tamachin, a great mythological item that was in the hands of one of the greatest conquerors in the world. The myth of the power of the sword of Tamachin is lost in history, but the myth expands into legend and becomes the stuff of comic books and adventures and movies. The movie The Shadow has to do with that specific legend and the myth of Temujin and whatever. And so that story propagates into myth and becomes fascinating. So the sword wasn't anything but a piece of metal, but it was carried by a man who was very, very successful at conquering. Therefore, it is conveyed to the item mysticism and magic that it wasn't physically there, but it definitely played out in the lore that he had a powerful magical sword. Yeah, so imagine, let's go with the story of a roleplay character. You put a character in your game, you have him find a sword in a fight scene. He picks it up from the hand of a dead king. If you've seen the movie Conan, you know where I'm going. He picks the sword from the hand of a dead king, assuming that the dead king must have been a powerful being. So he holds that sword, goes into the next fight scene, and in the fight scene, he swings the sword a couple times, and lo and behold, it breaks the corrosion off of it, and it's not a half-bad sword. It's actually a good sword. So now he cleans it up. Now he polishes it. Now he sees there's some writings on it. He doesn't understand the language yet, but he thinks it's interesting that it's got the writing. So now he starts to convey to the item magical powers, that maybe the letters on it are runes that are giving it great magical power. You as a game master haven't done anything. You haven't given him any modifiers. You just interpreted the die rolling as you normally would, which, by the way, NycosRPG has a blow your mind way of die roll interpretation. We'll get to that later. But the sword in that person's hands, to them, becomes mystical. The lettering become runes to them. They consider them important. So they study. And so that character then begins to learn a language. So now the character is becoming more enhanced because he's learning about the world and he's learning this language, and he finds out that the weapon was actually made by a great blacksmith. But he doesn't understand that the blacksmith wasn't the guy whose sword he's carrying, so he thinks that the blacksmith's name was the name of the person, so he gives the sword the name of the blacksmith. So now the sword becomes more powerful, and therefore not because it's actually more powerful, but because he conveys to it belief that it is more powerful. And so therefore he takes better care of it, and he polishes it and shines it and puts a good edge on it. Then now because he put an edge on it, it actually is a better sword. So now it does some successful things. So he later decides he wants to honor this weapon. So now that he's got the name, he's going to go to the local community and tell them that this sword was the weapon by the name of this guy who he doesn't know was the blacksmith. Well, the town has a legend about the blacksmith that it wasn't anything to do with that guy at all, but they talk about how the blacksmith, at a point in history, was the local hero and saved the town. So now the weapon's even got more reputation built on it that it saved this town. The whole point here is that the character in his play has invoked magic onto the weapon without there being any die roll, without there being any modifiers, without there being any mystical anything other than belief. But now it went one step further. In the world of Nykos, a player can learn to invoke mystical power and convey that to his items. So now the player begins to do that. He studies these words, and he takes that engraving, he starts to fill in the lettering. Yes. So the whole point is now he's doing the engraving. Now he's putting the gold into the engravings. Now he's embossing, and embossing actually is a way of conveying magic in Nykos. So now he's embossed into the weapon magic. So now the weapon is magical, but it wasn't when he got it. But he never thought about it. He always assumed it was. So now that it is magical, because he's conveyed it power, it becomes a legendary item. So that is the way story becomes legend becomes reality, and reality therefore conveys mysticism and magic into places that it wasn't before. Hope that makes sense. Right, so with that, have we answered the question about The mud. Yes, you see, you're going to grab the monster's going to grab them and drag them under. So therefore, the idea of laying the planks is it may actually be in part because they know a little bit more than they're telling. Maybe the players don't know, but the local builders know that there's a recess that they're being drawn into, and so they're using the wood to create a roof over it. Maybe that's why the players get trapped or whatever, is because they get too close to the edge. So I've run through the stories. Anything yet that we need to? Okay. Well, thank you so much, Iraq Banre, for being here and for the conversation. Thank you for following us. If you haven't yet, go over to the YouTube channel and subscribe there, because I've got a ton of videos over there. Matter of fact, all about the NycosRPG. There's an entire playlist that can help you learn how to do that. Oh, I know how that goes. You have a great day, and I'm glad to see you. And we will be here. It's now 1 o'clock, so it's getting excellent. Yay! So I'll send you the link for the Discord, and you can hop on with us, and be glad to have you with us. So with that, I do want to get out of here. I've got less than 10 minutes to go, and they're UDs. I like that. We're going to use that from now on. My ideas are my ideas, but when it's something built on what you've given me, they're UDs. So I hope my UDs are helpful. I hope that your games work better. And we have got to get out of here. And we will be back on air tomorrow night at 11 p.m. I do have a game tomorrow night in Redlands, California. So if you're here in Southern California, feel free to join us. Otherwise, I'm going to be popping off, so to speak, and I will see all of you on the morrow. And have a great night, everybody. And thanks for showing